Another trade for the Minnesota Wild as we welcome in Nick Deslauriers from the Anaheim Ducks. We talk about the trade. We talk about the fit. We talk about where he slots into the lineup. Plus, are the Minnesota Wild still in on Marc-Andre Fleury? We talk about that and more today on Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked on Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we recap the Nick Deslauriers trade, talk about where he slots into the lineup, plus we look at whether or not the Minnesota Wild could also be in on Mr. Marc-Andre Fleury after, of course, beating the Chicago Blackhawks on Saturday. So we'll talk about all of that as we get closer and closer to the NHL trade deadline on Monday. My name is Seth Topol, host of Locked on Wild, veteran Minnesota sports content producer with well over a decade's worth of experience covering all of your favorite Minnesota sports teams through their highs, through their lows, everything in between, and now fully settled in covering the Minnesota Wild. Happy to have you along for an emergency Sunday edition of Locked on Wild. And I say emergency, not necessarily because the Wilds lost to Chicago or anything in that regard. It's because Bill Guerin made another trade, this time with the Anaheim Ducks, bringing in some size, some bite, in his own words, Mr. Nick Deslauriers, who comes to the Wild in exchange for a third-round pick. Now, right off the bat, third-round pick for a guy who is going to slot in as a fourth-line guy. I don't know that you can necessarily put him on any of the other lines unless there's some sort of an injury that requires some roster juggling. But the other three lines seem pretty intact. Nonetheless, bring some size, bring some physicality, and some needed elements to this Minnesota Wild team. So, yeah, it maybe was a little bit of an overpay for the Wilds, but at the end of the day, Bill Guerin viewed it as a move that is going to help this Minnesota Wild team. And so, short of me doing what I just did, saying it seemed like it maybe was a little too much, Bill Guerin's the one making the moves. And so we welcome in Nick Deslauriers to this Wild mix, joining Tyson Jost as two players acquired by the Wild to help out here for the rest of the season. Now, a couple of differences between Delaurier and Jost. Delaurier is an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. So this potentially at least just more of a rental, depending on how the offseason goes. But Delaurier comes in at a pretty cheap price tag, had a, I believe it was a $2 million average annual value. So the Wild are not on the hook financially for a whole heck of a lot. And it's just the third-round pick, so no prospects or anything attached to that. But in looking at Delaurier and what he brings to the table, 6'1", and more importantly, he slots in at 215 pounds. So he's got some size to him, and it was really a point of emphasis for the Minnesota Wild to try to address the physicality, because as was pointed out a couple of different times by listeners, and Denny, one of those listeners that pointed it out, this Wild team against playoff opponents in the second half of the season has had trouble being pushed around by teams such as the Dallas Stars, the Nashville Predators, the St. Louis Blues on the Winter Classic. Up and down the list, the Wild have been starting to get pushed around by their opponents a little bit too much here in the second half of the season. And so the Wild clearly wanted to try to beef things up a little bit. And some interesting wrinkles to this as well that I saw on Twitter, and I'll try to reference tweets where I can. But I did see mentioned that this will bring Marcus Foligno a little help, so that he's not the only one trying to get retribution on the Wild end when players are smashed into the boards, things along that line. And so Delaurier will be somebody that will drop the gloves and will not be afraid to throw his muscle around against opponents. And from a lineup perspective, I think it's pretty obvious that Connor Dewar is probably headed back down to Iowa, because on that fourth line, I mean, you just acquired Tyson Jost, so you're not going to send him down or take him out of the lineup anywhere. So Tyson Jost is set. I really can't make an argument for getting Brandon Duhaime out of the lineup if the Wild are trying to add to their physicality, because Brandon Duhaime is the most physical player on that fourth line. So you all of a sudden trot out there Brandon Duhaime, Tyson Jost, and Nick Deslauriers to go along with the grief line, and maybe not as good defensively as the grief line is, and that's a tall order for anybody, because that's one of the, if not the best defensive line in hockey. But they're certainly going to have physicality, and I think it was interesting that the comments made by Bill Guerin and Dean Evason in regards to the trade. Guerin said it himself in that the Wild are acquiring a player with some size and some bite to him. Guerin saying Nick brings a certain abrasiveness to his game. He brings a physical nature to his game, leadership, sticks up for his teammates. He kills penalties. He's definitely a great add, and it will be an everyday player. So you're trying to turn that fourth line into kind of the roughhousers to go along with the grief line, so that you got your top two scoring lines, the Kaprizov line, the Fiala line. Those are your scoring lines. They're going to be the ones getting the goals. The grief line's purpose out on the ice is to slow down the opponent's top line. And now you have a line that you can throw out there that is going to just try to annoy the opponent to no end. So Bill Guerin addressing one of the biggest needs on this team in just size and physicality. And for only being a draft pick, for not really being tied up to any salary after this year, and for being a player that I don't know necessarily that the Wild were linked to in any way before the trade, it definitely fits the profile of what Bill Guerin was looking for. And so another trade that's I think, honestly, that's a little more active than I figured the Wild would be, with how some of these other prices for players are going. And we'll have, there's been a ton of activity this weekend. So we're going to try to recap things as we can. That'll probably be a Monday or a Tuesday episode, just trying to recap everything that we saw in the NHL, because there have been a lot of big returns for players who have been traded, except in the case of the Philadelphia Flyers for Claude Giroux. But we're not going to talk about that because it's Chuck Fletcher, and could have seen it coming from a mile away. But all in all, giving up a draft pick for a guy that's going to come in and he's going to be able to help push back. That's the big thing, is I think in that skid that the Wild were on, 2-8 in 10 games, we just didn't see a lot of push back from this team. And so I think this is going to help in that regard. And Delaurier, certainly, a veteran player, and he definitely does what Bill Guerin and Dean Evason alluded to, in that he's a pain to play against. Joel Eriksson Ek has that similar type of game where he's just a pain for opponents to go up against. And so that's something that the Wild are trying to add to their arsenal with the elite level scoring that have at the top end. So Bill Guerin making some more moves. It sounds like he may not be done. So when we come back, we'll take a look at what might be the next domino to fall, because the Wild continue to be linked to a Mr. Marc-Andre Fleury. We will talk about that when we come back here on Locked On Wild. It is the month of March. Spring is right around the corner. If you are trying to continue your eating better journey, Built Bar is here to help. Now, if you've gone through the lineup of Built Bars and you're looking for something to just shake things up a little bit, Puffs are definitely a great route to go. If you've never tried Puffs, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. And just like other Built Bars, they contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You can compare that with your average candy bar, which has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So if you want to get in on the Puffs Bonanza, head to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off of your order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Once you're finished with today's episode, keep in mind that on Monday we will be having quite a bit of trade deadline coverage, including Locked On Fantasy Hockey's live deadline reaction show, to get all of the on-ice fantasy and betting analysis you need from hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone, with appearances from our roster of local team experts. Plus, you can catch our own live trade deadline show for the Minnesota Wild at 2 p.m. Central Time to cover all of the moves the Wild make on deadline day. You can find Locked On Fantasy Hockey wherever you listen to podcasts. Marc-Andre Fleury continuing to be linked to the Minnesota Wild, and Michael Russo alluding once again that Bill Guerin has been checking in on the Chicago netminder. It is interesting that there are a lot of factors at play here. So for one, we looked a while back at whether or not Marc-Andre Fleury would be an upgrade over what the Wild currently have in net. And the reason is because it's a little difficult to tell if Fleury's numbers are the byproduct of Chicago's overall team in front of him, or if they are the result of himself getting a little older and starting to kind of lose some of the impact level skills that he had, in previous years in his career, such as with the Vegas Golden Knights. So, in looking at his numbers as of right now, 19, 20, and 5 on the season, that really doesn't matter. 2.9 goals against average, and he has a 90.9 save percentage. 22 quality starts of the 44 that he has right now. He also has 11 starts, which could be equated to really bad starts. That's a start with a save percentage below 85%. Now, goals saved above average is at 1.1. His adjusted goals against average is 3.01. So the numbers as they are right now are not too far off of what was expected of Fleury as we came into the season. You look at some of his performances against teams that the Wild would potentially match up against in the playoffs, and he has had some good. He's had some good outings against some of those potential playoff opponents. But he has also had some games in which he has been exposed a little bit and just started the year off on just an absolutely dreadful run that was largely in part to Chicago not carrying a lead until the sixth game of the season. But started the season off, gave up 4 goals against Colorado, Pittsburgh, the Islanders, then gave up 6 goals to Detroit. He did bounce back a little bit, but had a rough outing against the Jets where he gave up 5 goals in the first month of the season. Gave up 5 goals to the Rangers. Gave up 4 goals in a win to the Washington Capitals. But he has rebounded a little bit. Did in one of his last starts get worked pretty good by the Tampa Bay Lightning to the tune of 6 goals allowed. So is it the team in front of him? Is it him? What is the cause for this, kind of regression of the numbers that we're seeing for Marc-Andre Fleury? He is 37, but you look at Cam Talbot's numbers too. They're not that far off from what Fleury's doing. Talbot has a 90.7 save percentage, a 2.98 goals against average. Now, goals saved above expected, he's at negative 2.2. So he has actually given up 2.2 more goals than the average goalie would. And so my first thing to kind of summarize the Fleury pursuit, is it an upgrade over what the Minnesota Wild currently have? And that's not part of the equation there is actually in the net, but the other part of the equation is what is going on in front of the net. And it seems like it's been equal parts. One is more of an issue than the other on particular nights, but it does seem like in the Wild struggles here over the last couple of weeks that they have been pushed around pretty good by their opponents, and that's leading to opportunities in front of the net where players are simply just standing pat right in front of the goalie because the Wild haven't been able to push them away from that area. Additional chances because players come in and they just move the Wild off the puck. Rebounds that aren't corralled, bad bounces. It's just, there are a lot of factors in play. And so I guess my question is, would these same things still be happening if the Wild go out and get Marc-Andre Fleury? Would he fix some of the things that are going on with the team in front of him, or would those continue to happen? The other thing that's a little bit of an if for me is the cost. Just gave up a third-round pick for Nick Deslauriers, and that was for a guy that's going to play mostly fourth line for this team. Chicago is going to be able to ask for a lot for Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, we do have some prospects potentially going out of the system, that of course being Jack McBain, that will bring some draft picks back in. But I don't see a scenario in which the Chicago Blackhawks don't ask for at least a second-round pick for Marc-Andre Fleury. And it's probably going to be more like a first-round pick because there are some crazy hauls coming in for players that are being traded. And the Flyers trade, Philly was kind of backed into a corner with Giroux. He wanted to go to Florida. And so despite a better offer from the Avalanche, they really didn't have another route that they could go to make that happen. So, yeah, that trade looks bad, but at the end of the day, when you really think about it, after I got done kind of laughing at Chuck Fletcher, when you really think about it, they didn't have a whole ton of options for that. So you have to do the best you can in that situation. But this is not that situation for the Minnesota Wild. Marc-Andre Fleury, the Blackhawks are going to be able to get something back in return for him, considering that they just traded they just made a trade with the Tampa Bay Lightning that netted them a couple of first-round picks plus prospects. So the price to get Fleury is going to be very high. Now, if Bill Guerin is okay with that, then so be it. But I'll circle back to what we said before, in that if some of the issues that are facing this team are not necessarily on the goalie, is he going to fix them? That's the thing that I wonder about, is if you fix some of the things in front, and by that I mean the defense and just some of the overall physicality of this team at times. If you fix some of that stuff, do the numbers for Cam Talbot look better? Do the numbers for Capo Kakinen look better? And then, if that's the case, do you really need to throw a first-round pick to Chicago to go get a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury, who might be an upgrade? But if he's not, then where are we at? So they're going to be linked to him between now and the deadline. So I would say there's a non-zero chance that it happens. It's all going to come down to what that price ask is for Chicago. And so we'll keep tabs on it. We'll keep an eye on it. But Cam Talbot's recent performances probably should factor into the decision as well. Because, yes, I know Chicago's not great offensively, but Talbot did look pretty good in that game. So something to keep in mind. And, it's regardless, it's going to be a very active trade deadline. It already has been, but there should still be plenty of dominoes that fall for the Wild between now and then, and for the NHL in general. We'll finish today by taking a look at some of the other things that the Wild may look to address before Monday's deadline, and that'll be how we leave things. So we'll take a look at what else Bill Guerin might do. That's coming up next here on Locked on Wild. The NCAA tournament is in full swing. There have been no shortage of crazy upsets so far, and your bracket is probably, like mine, absolutely toast. But there is one spot that can help you keep up to date with all the latest odds, contests, and player props. That is betonline.net. They are the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. You can find all of it at BetOnline, where the game starts. Final segment of today's bonus emergency episode of Locked on Wild. And again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Trade deadline is 2 p.m. Central Time on Monday. Well, technically tomorrow. So Bill Guerin has addressed a couple of things. He's got Tyson Jost in the fold to center that fourth line in exchange for Nico Sturm. Brought in Nick Deslauriers to also help that fourth line in kind of becoming more of a rock'em sock'em kind of a fourth line to help the grief line in setting the tone. So what are some other spots that the Wild should be keeping an eye on to make maybe another depth move? Shout out Anson Carter. Another depth move to help this team if they're going to get themselves further back on track and try to just go right at somebody's teeth in the playoffs. Well, I think the spot that I would suggest is another defenseman. And I know I've been super vocal that the goaltending needs to improve. The goaltending needs to, pick it up to help out this team. And in looking back and looking at some of the games and looking at some of the goals scored and looking at some of the other things, I'm not totally letting the goaltending off the hook, but there have been some issues defensively, some gaps, some leaks, some soft spots in this Wild defense that have led to um, opponents being able to score seemingly at will. We saw it in the Boston Bruins game, a shot down to the point that hits Matt Dumba in the skate, and it pops perfectly out for a rebound and an easy tap and goal. Now that's not necessarily on the defense, but Dumba being right in front of Cam Talbot, and I'm not sure if he was looking for the shot, what was going on there. That's probably one of those fluky puck luck goals. Now the other one that was scored by the Bruins, the Marchand power play goal, where he skates into the zone. He catches the Wild in between because half of the penalty kill was retreating towards the net. The other half was trying to get into the zone, which allowed for a pretty wide open shot from the just to the right of the top of the zone. In a screen in front of Talbot, goal sails into the net to tie it up at 2-2. It seems like there just has been, a healthy amount of traffic in front of the net for one, and we have no shortage of smaller defensemen. Now, Jared Spurgeon, very, very good, but not one of the taller defensemen in the league, and not just height, but strength too. I keep doing this. I don't know why, but I think that's why we saw Jordy Ben get as much play as he has been, because he is a little bigger. He just doesn't really bring you a whole lot other than that. So if we can find a way to kind of upgrade Jordy Ben for a defenseman that can actually move around a little bit, but still can give you that big presence. This I think this was brought up in either the Soda Pod's last appearance on here, the last crossover that we did, or my last crossover there. And if it wasn't the Soda Pod, forgive me, but it seems like it was them, because this seems like something that is completely, out of left field enough that it would come from those guys. And again, follow them if you don't, because they are a source of some great Minnesota Wild related content here in the Minnesota Wild podcast landscape. But Zdeno Chara was brought up, and this is on me for checking this, as we are recording this episode. But obviously is just an absolute monster on the on that backline defense. And so you bring somebody like that in who can kind of rotate with some of those guys and gives you just a massive amount of size and some physicality. That and maybe not necessarily Zdeno Chara, but somebody like that who can do what Nick Deslauriers is going to be able to do, which is to mix it up when needed and to be another player on this team that can frustrate, can wear down, and can bully the opponents. If they can find somebody out on the market that can do that, I think that would be a worthwhile avenue for Bill Guerin to look into to try to further improve this roster. And so, the other element that we didn't necessarily talk about with Delaurier in bringing him in is that I think that moves Nick Bjugstad to your 13th forward. More than capable, if somebody gets hurt, of stepping into a spot in the lineup, but in some of Guerin's comments It certainly seems like he is somebody that is going to play every day. Now, in this defenseman case, if you bring somebody in, are they going to be somebody that you play every day, or somebody that can give you a little bit of a change of pace if somebody needs a day off or gets a little banged up? And there are plenty of those guys out there. It's just up to Bill Guerin to assess the cost and to pull the trigger. I don't even know if Zdeno Chara would be a bad get per se. I mean, he's just looking at his numbers. He's playing around 18 minutes per night for the New York Islanders right now at the age of 44. Ton of hits, ton of blocks. So maybe that's the route you go. I don't know if you would necessarily even want to come here, but maybe that's the route you go to just bring in. It's a theme, I think, that the Wild are showing that they need to get, and Bill Guerin is going out and getting it. Get some players. If you get punched in the mouth, can step up to the front of the line and punch back. That's where we're going to leave it for today. Now, we've got a lot coming at you between now and the end of the trade deadline. So we'll do our usual Micheletti Monday. We'll talk with Alex Micheletti about the weekend, look at the week ahead for this Wild team. We'll talk a little bit about the Vegas Golden Knights game. We've got a crossover coming up with Locked On Golden Knights that will also drop on Monday. So we got those 2 episodes as well. We will probably record a 3rd episode that will pop up sometime later Sunday night in just, a primer for some of the other moves that have been made throughout the NHL just to try to get up to speed. Then on Monday, if we have any news, any trades throughout the day, we'll have, of course, the Locked On Nows for that throughout the day. And then at 2 o'clock Central Time, we're going live. We'll do it live as why can't I think of his name now? Bill O'Reilly. We'll do it live. We're going to be live for an episode of Locked On Wild to recap the trade deadline, 2 o'clock Central Time here on YouTube. So make sure to stay tuned for that as well. But we got a ton coming at you because there's a lot going on throughout the NHL. So make sure to stay tuned with us. I know we've had a flood of new subscribers to the YouTube channel here over the last few days. So welcome to those of you who are new to the channel. We'll definitely keep you up to date. And I think this week we're going to fire up a mailbag too. We got enough people that subscribe to this channel, and especially some new ones that I'm sure you've all got some burning questions, Minnesota Wild related. So we'll fire up a mailbag this week as well. But going to be a crazy trade deadline. I'm excited. My first trade deadline as host of Locked On Wild. So we'll make sure we do it right. We'll make sure we keep you covered if the Wild do make any moves here, any additional moves between now and the trade deadline. So that's all we got. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already to Locked On Wild to stay up to date with all of your favorite Minnesota Wild news and recaps to games, trades, general news as well. We hit on everything just to try to keep you as up to date as possible. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button and follow us everywhere on social media as well, so that you can stay up to date on everything going on in the state of hockey. If a puck drops, if news breaks, if somebody gets traded, Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.